Committee of the Whole is called back to order on Bill 130, but we will continue to recess until we receive the quorum. Thank you. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. Thank you, my colleagues. The people of Guam, thank you for your patience. We do have a quorum. We will begin now the so-called third round, which is actually the round of amendments. I'd ask now, Mr. Guerrero, you can step out. We were now at the, and then you'll come back in shortly, but we'll be at the amendments or comments. You can choose between the two. You would have your 5 minutes, if I'm correct, allotted. And we'll, right? And we'll begin with, we have some colleagues that are not here, and what we'll do is we'll move along, and if we're done, then we're done, and we move on. If we're not done yet, then we can always go back to them to make their comments. All right? My colleagues, there, if I'm correct, there's one for sure amendment, and there may be one more en route. So please check your drive, and we'll begin with Senator Pito Terlai. If you want to make any comments or any amendments? None? You already spoke on that earlier? All right. We'll proceed with Senator Tello. You have any comments, or do you have an amendment that is ready on the drive?
Mr. Chair, can you please pass on me for now? I'm waiting for my amendment to upload and allow the others to speak on if they want to.
All right. Not a problem. We'll move now to Senator Tony Ada. Senator, do you have any comments or amendments?
No comments, Mr. Chair, and no amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Brown.
None at this time, Mr. Chair. I'll just
All
wait for the amendments to come up, and then I can provide my comments. Thank you, sir.
All right. Senator Schultz, nothing. Senator Parrish, do you have any comments or amendments?
I do have an amendment, if I can pass for now till it's ready.
It's being loaded on?
I believe it's being sent to clerks.
And as my colleagues, yours has not arrived yet, your amendment, Senator Parrish? No recess. We're gonna move along. Senator Tello, your amendment is online now. Would you like, one? You just received it? Okay, they're processing it right now, so we'll just move along. Senator Moylan, do you have any comments or amendments? We're gonna move along, and then when we're done, we're gonna do one quick round for amendments. Senator Duenas, do you have anything, sir? Nothing. Senator Terlai, Madam Speaker, you do have an amendment, and it's online, and it's identified as SB 130-TMT L25P3. Ma'am, would you speak to the amendment? And it's also the time for you to make comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When the Guam War Claims Commission reviewed the testimonies and other evidence in relative to Guam war claims, part of its findings included the following: that there was a lack of parity for the residents of Guam under the Guam Act as compared to the War Claims Act of 1948, because the latter only covered claims of persons who were United States citizens during World War II and did not cover loyal Guamanians who had the status of U.S. nationals at that time. Although residents of Guam were later granted United States citizenship under the 1950 Guam Organic Act, the grant was not retroactive. The War Claims Commission also found that the U.S. Navy put forth vigorous good faith efforts to address the war damage and loss claims of residents, but that it was hampered by the ongoing buildup of forces on the island in preparation for the Allied assault on Japan, by the frequent turnover of Navy personnel, evidenced by the fact that before 1950, a total of 7 land and claims commissions were successfully appointed, and by the fact that at the same time, the Navy was dealing with the claims, it was responsible for conducting a large-scale land acquisition program on the island, under which the U.S. government eventually came to occupy nearly 3/4 of the island. The commission also found that the Japanese occupation of Guam was particularly cruel, oppressive, and brutal, and that the loyalty and steadfastness shown by the people of Guam in the face of the atrocities and barbarism inflicted on them by their Japanese occupiers was all the more extraordinary in the circumstances in which they were forced to live. The Commission affirmed that there is a moral obligation on the part of our national government to pay compensation for war damages in order to ensure to the extent possible that no single individual or group of individuals bears more than a just part of the overall burden of war. And I submit to you, Mr. Chair, that the moral obligation is not extinguished while there are still individuals and groups of Chamorros who are bearing an unjust burden of the war. We all know of the families who've been excluded from these war claims. The Guam World War II Loyalty Recognition Act authorized only 2 categories of eligible claimants: living survivors who suffered as a result of the occupation of Guam, and the living spouse, living children, or living parents of individuals who were killed during the Japanese occupation of Guam. So survivors who were not living at the times that the claims were allowed, which is only in 2020, survivors had to have survived the war and the atrocities, of course, but they also had to have survived all the errors of the U.S. Congress and the Navy in distributing war claims over the years. The 1-year time frame for Guam's Manamco to apply was unreasonable. And we are grateful for those who came to testify on this, at the public hearing on this bill and the other related bills and resolutions for war claims, and those who testified at prior local hearings and at congressional hearings, for being there in person, for reminding us of their parents or their grandparents and their suffering, and their fortitude and their resilience. I think we should make it very clear on the record that we've heard them, those who have testified, and we won't stop advocating for them until they get what is just. I want to give credit to our Mañana for finding the courage, time and time again, to retell their stories in the hopes that the federal government recognizes the injustice and the lack of corrective action. The leaders of Guam have certainly repeated and asked the U.S. to address this oversight. Every single delegate of Guam has asked the U.S. to remedy the situation, and still many survivors have been missed. This amendment, Mr. Chair, that you referenced, will add the words, regardless of time of death, to the bill, which would allow for these claims to be paid to those who survived the war yet died prior to filing their claim. These people were ineligible by the federal program, and because we are paying this ourselves, I am proposing by this amendment that we include them. And that was the request at the hearing that we had, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. My colleagues, you've heard the introduction of the amendment. It's just to add the word regardless of time of death after the words to claimants prior to the word who failed to meet the 1-year deadline, regardless of time of death. Are there any objection or anyone would like to comment to that? Senator Brown, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I certainly appreciate the amendment that's been provided by our good speaker. I find it ironic and the challenge that we as a people are having to deal with the issue of war claims, and certainly concerned that the remaining survivors of this World War II are properly compensated, knowing their age and the amount of years that have passed since the atrocities and the challenges and the hardships that were suffered by our people. And it's really, I never would have imagined when I worked with this issue almost 30 years ago, when Congressman Ben Blas had introduced H.R. 2024 to address war claims to our people, that I'd be in a situation as a member of the legislature of having to decide on this issue that I wish would have been decided and addressed in the halls of Congress. Because rightly so, this burden belongs on the shoulders of the U.S. government. I also recognize, and again, anyone who has been born here, who has Chamorro blood or had loved ones that lived during the war, we're all descendants of that great generation. All of us know members of our family that survived and have suffered and have since died. And here we are today with this challenge in front of us of having to address, do we pay compensation? Because this is what this means, colleagues. Do we pay compensation to all those that were here during the war that suffered these atrocities but didn't survive the war? Keeping in mind that while we may be using Section 30 funds to compensate, we're literally paying this out of our own money, something that the federal government certainly had the responsibility and took on themselves. They took that on themselves when they essentially freed the government of Japan from these obligations to our people. Now we're put in the situation of having to pay the past, but it also means taking from the future. And I wrestle with this because I know that the loved ones in my family that suffered during the war are no longer here. I can never give them that sense of peace as a result of this. But we need to be mindful, we are taking from the future to pay for the past ourselves. We are the ones now that are being tasked to address this injustice to our own people. And certainly I will always stand on the side of wanting to address injustice to our own people. And I certainly will very seriously think about this amendment. But the funds that we are taking are for the future as well. It's to address the obligations we have to our people now. It's to address the obligations to the children that we have now in our community and those yet to come. So this is a very big amendment. It's probably the biggest amendment we'll deal with this term. So I certainly will listen if there's any further deliberation. And do I object to paying to those that have since died because they didn't, so they're penalized because they didn't survive? Just in the normal course of time? How do you survive 78 years? Many of us had family that were well into their years after the war. I had a grandmother who passed away 6 years after the liberation of Guam. I had a grandfather who passed away over 35 years that never got to see this day. Not the money, because money goes through our hands like water. Money goes very quickly. But just for the acknowledgement of what our people suffered, especially when they were left to have to rebuild their lives literally from nothing. I, like many others, had family that were here in Agana, had nothing to come back to. My grandfather just grew up right next to the old administration building. He had nothing to come back to and had children and had to rebuild his life pretty much with his own will and his own hands, as many of our parents, in most cases our grandparents, had to do to endure. So I certainly would like to see justice to that, but it's not justice to them that have passed, other than the acknowledgement that we pay out perhaps to their family or their descendants, but not to them because they're no longer here because of the injustice of our federal government and not addressing this issue sooner when the need was the greatest. But I would like to ask the sponsor, Mr. Chair, in my remaining seconds here, do we have any idea of exactly how much money we are talking about? Because I think in all fairness, before we make a decision on such an amendment, to quantify, potential cost of those that were here during the war and potential suffering of exactly how much money are we talking, that we may be talking about with regards to this amendment. Thank you,
Yes,
Mr. Chairman.
thank you. Senator, Madam Speaker, do you yield to the question?
Thank you. I will yield to the question. I don't have an exact answer of how many people had survived the war and yet did not survive to the period to make them eligible for war claims under the federal government's recent law. However, we do know the number of people that were alive after the war, because that was used by Congress in their calculation of their estimates of what they might have to pay out for war claims. And I think at the hearings, the testimony was between 20 or 21,000 people, and about 1,000 who had died. And I know there aren't that many who are listed up on the wall. There are less. It was about 16,000, and so I know that wall has to be updated. But and then we know, from this bill is before my amendment is calculating 700. So I don't know, because I haven't seen the figures either of how many have been compensated by the current process. I think we're still waiting for that, or I don't know those totals. But
All right, thank you. Senator
Mr.
Brown?
Chair, I know I'm running out of seconds here, but it would be good if there's some way we can have an idea of calculating or determine moving forward that we're going to set aside a certain amount for X amount of years until it's expended, because this is a big undertaking. We're not talking about putting a commission in place to address the remaining war survivors. This is going to be something that's going to take years. And then also the ability of our people, especially for those that have lost family members that died during the war that may not have been recorded, to verify. Because we're going to, and I don't think anyone's going to, my hope is nobody's going to come up and claim something that they're not duly owed. But the verification that's needed, especially during a time of war, who's keeping documents? But I think we need to be mindful of that, because we are taking money out of money that is intended for our people today. And that's the crossroads that we're at. That's where we're literally, having to split our heart here in having to address this, if this is the desire of the body to move forward to pay these monies out to those. I mean, I shouldn't be speaking, because then I somehow would be eligible somehow to receive that money, because my grandmother is no longer, my grandfather is no longer here. So I just think, colleagues, we need to have some sense of idea financially of what we are talking about, because it's not, if it's Uncle Sam is paying this out of his pocket, I'm all for it. But we are taking money out of the future. We're taking money from our children to pay for the sins of the past. And I just think we need to at least have a good idea of what exactly the figure is that we're talking about, and how much we're willing to take out of the money for now and for the future generations that would be in need of that.
All right,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Would that be considered, you're in the middle between an objection and an endorsement, correct?
I'm not objecting. I simply want information. I don't think we
Yes.
can make these major
Understood.
decisions without any idea of what we're talking about. Because again, if Uncle Sam is paying it, I'd be at the front of the,
Yes.
I'm all for it. But
Yes,
we're
ma'am.
taking money out of revenue that is coming and intended for our people.
All right.
And so I'd like to have an idea of what are we talking about financially.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else like to comment? Senator Pito, on the amendment.
Mr. Chair, let me just say that I rise in support of the amendment, and as articulated by Senator Brown, I also support her recommendation on this one. But I guess that the 700 people that they're talking about are people that are alive. And when you look at the bill, it doesn't say to pay those people that have passed away. So Senator Brown has mentioned, and I support the amendment. And also, I want to thank Senator Brown for coming out with that theory. Thank you very much, sir.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else like to comment? Senator Paris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment. But first of all, I just want to point out, I did some checking if legal can make some technical corrections on this, because the reference, I know it's throughout the bill, it's Public Law 14, in the bill it says 144-328, but I believe it's 114, it should be 114-328. So if legal can make the correction throughout the bill for the proper reference. But I just want to speak to this amendment. I think the proffer of this amendment said it so eloquently that there are those who passed away that did not, basically there was a gap in the bill that's being, that we are looking at right now, which is those groups of people that did not survive, who may have survived the war but did not survive Congress's inaction. And I think that's important to highlight that and ensure that all people that have survived the war, the horrors of the war, and, should be compensated.
Senator Paris, you're making a motion to make a correction? Technical?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yeah, basically, if a legal can make the technical corrections to the reference of the bill, that's being a reference, it says Public Law 144-328. It should be 114-328, or if that could be double-checked and verified. But that appears in throughout the bill, so that needs to be corrected if it proves to be true.
Let's take a quick recess. I just want to reconfirm what you're asking. Committee hall is called back to order. Senator Paris, in reference to your technical, yes, I spoke to legal. So your motion is for legal to make the technical correction, correct? To make it 114 instead of the 144,
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
All right, is there any objection to that technical correction to be made by legal? There being none, so ordered. Anything else you would like to bring up in reference to the amendment?
Yeah, I guess I just want to rise in support of this amendment, and I think it's important that we take a closer look at this implementation plan too as well, very closely. So yeah, I think what's important to note is that the compensation is more, I think it holds a lot of symbolism in that it's a pathway to recognizing the horrors that have occurred to our people. And I think more importantly, the work that we need to do to prevent a recurrence of war. I think, we were bystanders in this, global world war, and, whatever we can do not as an island, but also internationally, what we can do to work together and promote peace, to prevent these atrocities. It should not have happened to our people. And we need to do more to protect and prevent that from happening. And I think also recognizing, that, our people truly suffered. And this is more of a symbolic gesture, if anything. I know it seems unjust that we ourselves are paying for it. And like the previous speakers have said, it's, the moral obligation has not been extinguished. And I think that's important to recognize that. The other thing, too, is just more of the logistic side of things when we talk about implementation, that, there should be some sort of consistency with...
Are you referring to the amendment, ma'am? Let's stay with the amendment, and then if you
Yes.
want to bring up anything else, okay?
Yes,
no
I'm
problem.
referring to the implementation plan.
Okay.
So yeah, in regards to that part of the amendment where it states, or this part of the passage, that the implementation plan, really needs to be handled with consistency so that people are not being compensated unequally for those that were handled by the U.S. government versus what's being handled locally. So, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Senator Paris. That's a endorsement. Senator, now, anyone else? And I think I saw the hand of Senator Blas. Senator Blas, any comments to the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, just so that I can wrap my head around what this amendment says, because Yes, the amendment here is regardless of time of death, as opposed to regardless of date of death.
Regardless of time of death. As long as you were part of the war, when you died is irrelevant. You didn't apply, you're going to be given compensation. That's my understanding. Unless you want to ask the author of that bill, of that amendment.
Yeah, maybe if you can ask the author, because it says regardless of time of death. Time of death is basically on the clock. Date of death is, so I guess if the author of the amendment can yield to the question.
Yes, Speaker Terlai, would you yield to the question?
I would yield. I have no objection to using the word date in place of time, if that would make anyone feel more comfortable. It was intended to mean the same.
And I appreciate
So
that.
I hear your concern.
I appreciate that answer, Mr. Chair. That said, if you look at the language, if we're going to base this on public law, the United States public law, and we're going to basically follow that structure and what it says there. Unfortunately, there are specific times of death. Dates of. Okay. One is that if you were not alive on December 23rd, I think the date was 2016, to file, all those that passed away prior to December 23rd, 2016 were not eligible to file. This bill wants to recognize those individuals who obviously were alive past December 23rd, 2016, but missed the filing deadline, which was, I think, June something of 2017 or 2018. That's what this bill calls for. To open it up, and really, I'd love to be able to do this. However, I think that it's in contradiction to the law that we're asked to follow. If that be the case, then why make reference to that United States public law? And if we were to do that, in the last census that was conducted back in 1945, there were over 21,000 people that were living on this island. So, and there were about close to 3,500 individuals that filed a claim. So you can conceivably look at close to 15 to 16,000 individuals eligible to file a claim should this pass. Just do the simple math, 16,000 times the mean average of about $10,000 per claimant. And if we were to do that too, that would take some time to be able to look at the 1947 Hopkins report, of which there were claims that were paid. So it's going to be a major undertaking. That if you were to go through the bill and everything, the process of the bill, and the timelines that have been set, to be able to start to pay these claims, that's going to be an almost impossible feat. So, but first, so that we can fix this amendment, if this amendment were to pass, and if I heard correctly, the author of the amendment had no issue with changing time to date. Defer to the author again, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
You have no problem?
Madam Speaker?
Yes, I have no objection to that. Changing the word
So
time
that
to
it is
date.
clear as to what this amendment is for, I think that it has to be so that amendment to the amendment is regardless of date of death.
Date of death.
Which is changing time to date. Do I need to write this out?
Do my colleagues need that in writing? If not, we'll make the motion to make that change. Strike out time, put the word date. Are there any objection to that amendment? Madam Speaker?
Yes, on the amendment, Mr. Chair, I support the author's amendment. The intent of the underlying amendment is exactly to include those who died prior to December 23, 2016. Congress made this deadline or this date of December 23, 2016, and any war survivor who did not live, was not alive on December 23, 2016 was not eligible for war claims. Anyone who died after December 23, 2016 is eligible for war claims. So the bill estimates that those who lived, and may have died after, might be up to 700 people, right, who are eligible under the original bill. Under this amendment, I think the author is correct, that if we look at what was testified in Congress when they were talking about the law, the War Claims Act, they were estimating 21,000 people who either died or remained or survived the war. And so I'm looking at the website, Department of Justice, and it looks like the most that they might have received claims so far is 3,872, even though they had intended, I'm sure, to pay much more, right? And so, yes, this may be significant, but I think based on the numbers we're looking at Department of Justice, there's a huge gap in filers, right? Between who's entitled, who's eligible, and even who filed. We still missed so many people. And so, yes, but it is exactly the intent to include those who were alive, including, for example, those who testified on our behalf. They advocated for all of Guam, including Beatrice Elmsley, Tomas Barcenas. All of those people who suffered testified to Congress and then became ineligible for the war claims because they died before that pretty much arbitrary date of December 23, 2016, Mr. Chair. So I support the amendment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Senator Blas, just understand you ran out of time, so we're just going to go to the amendment so we can finish off.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Duenas, did you had your hand up, or Senator Ada?
if I can just yield my time to Senator Blas so that
All
he
right,
can finish
thank you.
with this.
I was hoping
thank you.
someone would do that. Thank you very much. Senator Duenas, did you have anything you wanted to comment to the amendment, or?
I want to discuss the amendment, but I would like to defer to Senator Ada's motion and to finish with Senator Frank Blas.
All right. Are there any, I know there's no objection. The yielding of time, 5 minutes, is given now to Senator Blas. You have his time, but we'll continue first. Senator Blas, with any comments to your amendment first? All right? Because
There is a comment to my amendment, Mr. Speaker, because in that, first off, it provides clarity succinctly as to what this amendment would actually do and what was the intention of the amendment. And in that, it profoundly changes this bill. Profoundly. That actually, you know, and you know what? Again, I have to say, it's very difficult to say that you don't want to do this, but at the same time, you've got to be real, and we have to be realistic as to what this amendment will do, even if the change of that amendment was to be made. I want to speak, and I think I still do have some time left in speaking on the main amendment, but on the amendment to the amendment, I proposed it and I proffered it so that it could bring clarity to what the purpose is. So I will close on, my proffer of the amendment to the amendment, recognizing I still have time to talk about this on the amendment.
Yes, you do, Senator
Thank
Blas.
you very much. So I close on this amendment.
You close on the amendment? Senator, do you have any comments in support or non-support?
Mr. Chairman, I want to ask the mover of the primary amendment, because of the way that Senator Blas is, I think he's asked an intriguing question, but I don't think we've had the author yield. So I would ask the author of the amendment, when we discuss the regardless of time of death, and we're referring to the public law, is that a conflict in legal construction?
Let's take a short recess.
I'll yield,
And let
Mr.
me
Chair.
get with legal to make sure, because he didn't make a statement, Senator Boss made it, and you're basically asking for us to make
Point
sure.
of order, Mr. Chair. Are we
Yes.
on the Blas amendment?
Yes, we're still at the Bloss Amendment.
Okay.
But he did make a statement about,
I can ask it on the main amendment, that's fine.
I would yield.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna-
If you don't want to yield at this point, I'll
No,
ask
I
it
want
on
to
the-
yield.
Okay.
yes, well, we'll go ahead and take a short recess, real short, and we'll get with legal. Thank you. committee of the whole is called back to order. My colleagues, the author of the amendment to the amendment is closed. Senator Ennis wanted to comment to that amendment. That's all, and then after that, then we go to the motion to vote on the amendment. When we're done with that, then we'll go back to the amendment as amended, if amended. Okay? Senator Dueñas, please, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I was referencing the dialogue that the proffer of the amendment was making, and I actually have a discussion on that, but it seems more appropriate on the main amendment. So at this point, I'll withdraw my question, and I will reiterate it when I speak on the main amendment. Situs Masi.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to speak to the amendment? To the amendment? Correct? That's Senator Blas's amendment. Are there any objection to his amendment? There being none. Motion passes. Now we'll go back to Senator Blas, which you still have time. You're running out of time, but you still got time to talk about the amendment as amended.
Yes.
All right? Thank you, Senator Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, with the amendment that now that is clear, if we were going to reference, and if we're referencing Public Law 144-328, which is the U.S. law, that basically that had provided
Senator Blas, it's 114. They're making that technical correction. So anyway, go ahead and
114-328,
continue.
the United States public law passed by Congress. Okay, I'm going to make reference to that. If we were to reference that law in this bill, that law was very specific in as far as who the eligibility, the individuals eligible to apply for, and that was on December 23rd, 2016. A departure from that is basically a departure of following that law, which makes then that law moot, because we are not going to be following that law. As a matter of fact, we're not going to follow the law on the front end nor the back end. What this bill initially proposed was to basically follow that law and expand the back end, not expand the front end. I think, Mr. Chair, that because this amendment provides a very profound and very substantial change to the initial legislation, I think we would be remiss, and I would be remiss in being able to understand how this would affect the intentions of this legislation without hearing from the sponsors of this legislation as to the effect that this amendment would have on their legislation. Recognizing that if this amendment were to pass, it profoundly changes this legislation, okay, and it substantially increases those individuals who will be eligible to then now apply or to be able to apply for that war claims from 700 to well over 15,000 individuals. Very substantial. But I think that in all fairness to the movers of this legislation, I would like to, before I can make any decision on this thing, I would like to hear from them on how this is going to affect. So my question to the movers of the legislation, the authors of this legislation, is what is their take on how this amendment is going, how they feel this amendment is going to affect, positively, negatively, therefore or against, I need to know. So that's my question, and I would like to propose to the authors of this legislation.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Blas. To the authors of the amendment, I would ask Senator Moylan, you're the co-sponsor. Unfortunately, Vice Speaker's not here. If you could speak to that question.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, colleague, for the question. Colleagues in the bill also, and I think we're having really good discussion on this, of all the different ideas we have to develop this idea of reopening the War Claims Act. And in the bill, we also talk about, there's a comment there that the Guam delegate urged the legislature to act independently to ensure what we were talking about earlier, what the moral obligation is to fulfill this in a timely manner. And of course, meaning timely manner, we can do it a lot quicker than the Congress can. And I'm glad we're having this discussion on Bill 136 to see what we really want to include or not include. This is good that we have different amendments and ideas, and I don't object to the amendment. And a really reason why we do this is because we're trying to create a workable plan. A workable plan to fulfill all those that were left out of this war reparations. Right? And we can adjust that plan as well. But let's remember what the intent of this bill is. It requires the governor to submit a plan to pay war claims to ensure who failed to meet the deadline. If we want to put an amendment in to say otherwise as well, like we're discussing now on this amendment, fine. But who's going to come up with the plan? It's the governor. And if this amendment is included in this bill, that's fine. If the governor doesn't follow it, we won't know until we see the plan. And the timeline of 30 days, when we talk about 30 days, it's to submit a plan. It's not to start paying in 30 days. It's for the governor to submit. Then this body comes back together to adopt that plan, reject the plan, or again amend the plan. If we have some great, brilliant ideas that we want to put in for the governor to consider, then so be it. I don't object to this amendment at all. And if the governor doesn't, well, then the governor has to answer to that and the people of Guam. But let's find out what the governor has planned. The governor is anxious to get this done, and we're giving the deadline of 30 days to submit, not start paying, but to submit. And where would the funds come from? From Section 30 money. There's a letter in support in the drive that the governor says, let me at it. Let's get this going. So let's take the governor up on her request to this body. And if we want to add more to amend this bill and something in support that we feel is better and can make it stronger, we'll give her some good ideas. So I do not object to this. How this adjusts, I wouldn't know until I see the governor's plan and that she is waiting to submit to this body for approval. Then we can decide on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, as the co-sponsor of the bill.
Point of information, just that.
Point of information, yes,
Yes,
Madam
so
Speaker.
the Vice Speaker wasn't in communication with me regarding this bill yesterday, and so I did run this amendment by her, and she did say she had no objection to it, and so I just wanted to put that on the record, because the bill itself does depart from the congressional law. So in effect, it creates our own local program. It is creating our own program here. We're going to have an entirely different panel to review the claims and an entirely different time, constraints, filing periods, and by this amendment, hopefully, eligibility.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Blas, did that answer your question, or would you like?
Yes, it did answer my question. I thank you very much, and I appreciate that I appreciate the response from one of the co-sponsors to the bill, and from the speaker and in her discussions with the main sponsor. That said, Mr. Chair, I would be remiss not to mention that in this now new plan that would be if this legislation were to pass with this amendment, if this new plan now would basically mean for at least 15,000 individuals at a price tag of close to $160 million. Okay? I have to agree yesterday in the concern that the speaker brought up with regard to the amount of time that could be necessary to put together a feasible plan, Putting together a feasible plan for 700 or no more than 800 individuals is a lot different than putting together a feasible plan for 15,000 claimants. Substantially different. I need to bring this up so that we recognize what this, as was mentioned and as was admitted, and and I appreciate it, and I'm glad she did, because it's not hiding anything from this, that this is a substantive and a substantial amendment. And, is this now, if this passes, the rest of this legislation, what is that going to mean in as far as actually putting it together? We've got Manumco that is watching this right now.
Senator Blas, with those statements, I'm going to ask for a recess and speak with legal.
Okay.
And I'll make the ruling of if it's materially different from the intent of the bill, as you made that statement.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. We're in a short recess. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. Senator Blas?
Mr. Chair, I'm really struggling with this, but I think that, this would help if we get a ruling from legal as to whether or not this, if this amendment were to pass, does this in fact then change this bill? And, and as far as it being materially different, substantially, it is my belief that it's substantially different from the original intent of this legislation. So if we can get a ruling from
Yes.
legal on that, thank you
Yes,
very
Senator
much.
Blas, I'm ready to make the ruling. I did speak to legal that if
Mr. Chair, if I may, before you rule, I just want to put on the record that this amendment was suggested by the testimony of particularly Mr. Garrido, who was present at the hearing. Thank you.
Understood. I watched the hearing. But my colleagues, see, even that, see, forget it when you reach a certain age. But number one, my colleagues, let me just make it very clear. I spoke to legal. If this bill, I would have to rule this amendment as materially different than the intent of the bill. So I'll rule that if this was to pass, that it'd be wrong. Let me start with that. That being said, Senator Blas, I hope that answers it. It'll make the bill materially different.
I
the
think that
intent of the bill.
first of all, I agree with your ruling, Mr. Chair. However, we have to make it ripe. First off, there still has to be a discussion as to whether or not this amendment passes or not. And then if this amendment passes,
I'm ruling it materially different, and it's out of order.
I move to
Unless-
challenge the ruling of the chair.
All right, you're asking for the overrule of the chair?
Yes.
All right,
Again, Mr. Chair, just because this,
Understood.
this amendment, this topic, this war claims and the restrictions of Congress were exactly what was discussed at the hearing, the restrictions of filing deadlines, the restriction of eligibility, and it was the testimony of those present that were demanding of us that we, if we're going to try to achieve justice, that we achieve justice in all regards. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Understood. I'm not debating what people testified. I'm just based on the bill. Okay? Let's just follow the rules of engagement here. All in favor of overruling the chair, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Motion fails. Let's move on to the next amendment, please. Next amendment is,
Mr. Chair, yeah.
Madam Speaker?
Yeah, I have my second
Well-
amendment.
What we have first in the order of it's coming in, okay, Senator?
Well, I was the
okay.
one, oh, okay,
Go
so
ahead.
you're going to,
We're going to give it to you, Senator Tello said no problem, we'll give it to you.
well, it's up to you. I had the floor earlier, so.
No problem.
All right,
Continue,
so the
please.
second amendment is, it's on subsection B of section 13.203, line 4, page 4, is to add, where we talk about the governor's authorized to transfer sums available to her for the purposes outlined in this bill. I'm adding the words, provided that such transfer is reported to the Speaker and the Office of Finance and Budget no later than 5 working days before the transfer is made. Said transfer report shall indicate which fund, object categories, object groups, and agencies the funds were transferred to or from. This is in light of the discussion yesterday where, the original law, the local law, what the governor used as authority to pay out war claims prior to the Department of Justice paying out the war claims, she was supposed to transfer money to the fund. We are unable to track that transfer because there was no documentation of it. And we know that when the, money was used, obviously, from the general fund somewhere to pay for the war claims, and then when it was reimbursed, that money the treasury money did not remain in the war claims fund as was dictated by law. It was removed and reimbursed the general fund, it looks like. But that was not what the original law, passed by the Vice Speaker dictated. So this, I'm hoping, is just a reporting requirement. This is exactly the same reporting requirement that we use for all other transfers, so that we get advance notice. So
Understood.
this would just make this consistent with the other transfers, and hopefully then we will know if they're taking money out of some other purpose, some other agency for the purposes of work claims, that's fine. Obviously, they've decided that that's possible. They can do that, but we will be able to know it. And I think that's important for us, budgeting purposes, as we have already passed the budget. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does any of my colleagues like to speak to that? Senator Blas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I am full support of this amendment. As was, again, reiterated and talked about in yesterday's discussions, obviously, this amendment to subsection B is crucial because it speaks to, and unfortunately, in this same section, subsection A, there's nothing there. And so if we were going to look at this, and that there's going to be monies that are going to be changed and moved around so that they can satisfy this, again, we just went through a whole budget process, and a lot of these agencies got basically bare bones. So where is this money going to come from? I think that I would be more attuned to be able to make this as part of the plan that is supposed to be submitted to us, as opposed to afterwards, create a plan and says, okay, I'm going to do this plan. How are we going to pay it? Oh, I don't know. I'll tell you 5 days before I do this. For me, that's an idiotic plan. So that's another discussion to be had, later on. But in the meantime, for the purposes of this discussion on this amendment, this is necessary, and I stand in full support of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Senator Dueñas, to the amendment.
Titus Masi, Mr. Chairman. You know how one of my favorite uncles, whenever we were moving along and getting things done, he used to say, now we're cooking with gas. So I support this amendment. Yesterday we had a lot of back and forth and how the bill is structured, and we're amending the bill now. This is exactly what we need to do. Yesterday, there was a discussion about what is the accounting of money that was allocated, appropriated under the general fund to jumpstart the program, and whether or not it was supposed to be reimbursed and put in the fund. Where is it? We can cook with gas a little bit more and pen a letter to the public auditor, ask that question, what is the reconciliation, so we can figure that out. So I like this amendment. It's the right amendment. It's the way to do business. Suzus Masi, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Drainus. Moving across, no one else would like to speak? Madam Speaker, if you could close your amendment, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank my colleagues for their support. This is just an attempt to truly do the right thing in this bill, make it accountable, make us able to continue to know where the money's coming from. Again, I support the bill wholeheartedly. We have seen the record of attempts by the Navy and Congress in war claims and pretty much the history of errors. And I believe that the recent war claims is again an error in that it excluded so many people who this bill is trying to include. And so I absolutely support inclusion of the people who have been excluded, and I support inclusion of those who really, the whole point of war claims is for those who had suffered. So this amendment, Mr. Chair, I hope will make this bill more sound and more practical for our purposes as well going forward. And I absolutely agree with the senator from Vergara that this should be part of the plan. They should tell us in advance, in fact, where they intend to fund, get the funds for the program and how much they think they will need and or they will be willing to set aside. And thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Are there any objection to the amendment? There being none, amendment passes. That completes your amendments, Madam Speaker. Now we will move to Senator Tello. You have an amendment, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I propose an amendment to substitute Bill 130. It's on line 4, page 4, to amend the bill to, well, it's actually not to amend it. I'll have legal make technical corrections to that. Instead of amend, it's add to the bill and to renumber the original 13.203 and subsequent sections accordingly. Mr. Chair, I offer this amendment to help move Bill 130 as substituted and ensure that this legislature doesn't completely delegate its responsibility to develop public policy for the benefit of our people. Mr. Chair, this amendment reflects a separate effort by this legislature to create a local war claims review process. A step that by the way, will recommend by our that was recommended by our congressional delegate as well in response to questions on whether the U.S. Congress should amend federal law to accommodate outstanding war claims. Mr. Chair, the amendment requires that at a minimum, the implementation plan required by Bill 130, as substituted, incorporates the establishment of a committee to adjudicate through a formal application process war claims, compensation requests from individuals who are eligible to apply for compensation pursuant to federal law, but were unable to submit required documents to the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission of the U.S. on or before June 20th, 2018. Mr. Chair, the composition of the proposed adjudication committee includes public officials who will be responsible for getting things off the ground and who will be held accountable by our people if this policy doesn't materialize as envisioned. This amendment helps to ensure that all rules and regulations and decisions that are put together by the proposed adjudicated committee shall be consistent with the program guidance and award limits that have already been established by federal law with respect to war claims. Mr. Chair, the Director of Administration will be required to keep this legislature informed on the number of applicants that are submitted, adjudicated, and settled, and regarding all payments paid out pursuant to Bill 130, if approved. And Mr. Chair, consistent with the language that we approved for Public Law 35-61, this amendment provides that information concerning the identity of the war survivors and their application for war claims shall be protected and shall not be part of the record, public record. Mr. Chair, I have serious reservations on Bill 130 as substituted because it lacks a framework. It doesn't guide the administration on what this legislature expects from those who will be authorized to develop a war claims program for a Manamku. Mr. Chair, notwithstanding the issues that I have with this bill as drafted, including the fact behind its introduction, I put forward this amendment because I believe this legislature must do everything in its power to right a wrong and to always put people before politics. Mr. Chair, I've shared before, whether it was due to having little to no information available about the application process or the time needed to put together their application or other documents, or because they weren't emotionally prepared to relive the painful days of World War II on Guam, which turned into months and years of darkness for them and their families. It is my prayer that this amendment, Bill 130, if approved, will help bring peace and closure to the greatest generation. Mr. Chair, the amendment for the listening audience, it basically says that a committee shall be established, adjudicated committee established. At a minimum, the implementation plan required by this act shall incorporate the establishment of a committee responsible for adjudicating through a formal application process war claims, compensation requests for individuals who are eligible to apply for compensation pursuant to Public Law 114-328, but were unable to submit required documents to the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission of the United States on or before June 2018. The adjudication committee shall consist of 5 members: the executive director of the Commission on Decolonization or his or her designee, the governor of Guam or his or her designee, the Speaker of Legislature in Guam or his or her designee, the President of the Mayor's Council of Guam or his or her designee, and a member of the general public appointed by the governor. A chairman shall be elected among the members of the adjudication committee. The adjudication committee may establish rules, regulations, procure goods, services, and solicit
Senator
personal...
Tuttle?
Oh, I'm just reading the amendment for the record.
I would highly recommend to all my colleagues, whenever you're doing an amendment, read your amendment, and then you can talk about anything else. But we need to move on. Your time's out.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm reading for the record for the people listening audience to understand this amendment. I mean, I stated my case on it, but it's important for the listening audience to see what the amendment says. They don't get a copy of these amendments on the website. So I'm just reading it in for the record.
Senator Tuttle, I'll tolerate it, but I'm going to remind you, you have 5 minutes. Every one of my colleagues, you have time to speak and read your amendment.
Okay,
Not talk about everything else on the bill. Read your amendment, and then you can talk about anything else.
Okay.
I'll allow you to just finish it off, and let's wrap it up, because there's others that like
Okay.
to speak to your amendment.
Okay, Mr.
Thank you.
Chair, I apologize. I should have read the amendment first for the listening audience and then speak on it, so I do apologize for that. So finishing off, the adjudication committee may establish rules and regulations, procure goods and services, and solicit personal assistance and other administrative support from the governor of Guam and the Speaker of Legislature in Guam as may be necessary to effectively and efficiently administer the provisions of this act. Divisions by the adjudication committee shall require a majority vote. 13.204, consistency with established guideline, rules, and regulations and award limits. The adjudication committee shall adjudicate all applications submitted by compensatable Guam victims or survivors of compensatable Guam descendants as defined by the Guam World War II Loyalty Recognition Acts enacted through U.S. Public Law 114-328. All rules and regulations and decisions rendered by the Adjudication Committee shall be consistent with the program guidance and ward limits established pursuant to Public Law 114-328. And then reporting requirements, a portion of any funds authorized to effectuate the requirements of this act may be used by the Adjudication Committee for administrative and legal assistance. Until the payment of all eligible war claims applicants have been paid out, the Director of Administration shall submit a report every 6 months summarizing the number of applicants which have been submitted, adjudicated, and settled, and shall include information on all payments issued pursuant to this act. C, information concerning the identity of war survivors and their applications for war claims shall be protected and shall not be part of the public record. And of course, to allow the Legal Bureau to make technical corrections as needed. Instead of amended, it will be added. And thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair, and again, apologize for not reading this amendment first before making my speech.
Thank you, Senator Tello. Does any of my colleagues like to speak to the amendment? Looking for hands. I see none on Senator Brown. Or Senator Moylan first. Or you to Senator Brown. Senator Brown? Senator Moylan yields to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I certainly do rise in support of the amendment that has been proffered by Senator Tello Taitigui. I appreciate her efforts in doing this, as she and Senator Blas had introduced a bill also to address this issue that was actually introduced before the current bill that is before us, and for whatever reason, did not receive the same timely public hearing so that it would put it before the body. But nevertheless, I think there's a way we can compromise and include the structure that the bill that was proposed by Senator Tello and Senator Blas provided, at least, though we set a framework. I think we want to facilitate as much as we can for the remaining survivors of the war. My gosh, 78 years. That's a long time to wait to have these issues addressed, and then to only be given 1 year to be able to file. And if you miss that deadline, then you were out of luck. And I think we all see the injustice in that. But I think putting forth a recommended structure for the formalization of the commission that will be able to be put in place that can help facilitate and expedite and providing a framework rather than leaving it open-ended. Because if we don't agree with what the governor proposes, then what? Then it takes a little more time for us to come back, deliberate further, versus at least providing a structure that to me is fair and reasonable to put in place and set up so that we can actually move on and get the remaining claims facilitated while these members of our community that we very much want to see duly compensated are still with us. So I certainly rise in support of this amendment that's been proposed. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Moylan, you had your hand up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, these are all good suggestions moving forward, hopefully to see in what the governor will actually provide in her plan. Suggestions, right? And whether this amendment passes or fails, I'm sure the executive office will be hearing these type of ideas. Whether or not they'll implement it into their plan, I don't know. But what I know of commissions and committees, it takes some time to formulate. It takes some time to put together. It takes some time to have a meeting with enough people to make a decision. And I think while we're talking about this Bill 130 and whether it be another bill that offers similar things, the time is ticking. And if you want to put it, what we were discussing before, does anybody really know what time it is? That's a good song that reminds me of what's going on with this. The time is that we are not taking action. And if we can expedite this process with having the governor come up with a plan that this body would then have to review once again to amend or reject or adopt, then let's see what they have in mind. Maybe the commission and the committees is a good idea. And maybe we should look at that as a separate discussion. Maybe we should look at a couple of plans at the same time in addition to this one that we're discussing now. And And if we already had a public hearing on that and there's a committee report, there's nothing from stopping the author of that bill to address it on the floor, make a motion to put it on the agenda if we so wish. And that's possible to do. But Mr. Chair, I would also like to ask legal's opinion on this, if this will be germane to the bill that we are now discussing, first off. That's my concern. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's take a quick recess. Let me confirm. Thank you. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. Senator Moylan, to your question, it is, it'll be ruled as germane. It is germane to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No further comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other colleagues have their hands up? They wanted to speak? There, Madam Speaker, and then we'll get to Senator Clint. You want Senator Clint first? Okay, Senator Clint, you got 5 minutes, sir.
Yes, I just have a question for the chair. I do share some of the concerns raised by the previous speaker. My question for the chair is, we just recently ruled another amendment as materially different. This amendment is like 2 pages long. It's almost like another bill itself. So I'd like to ask the chair if the chair believes that this is materially different, just as the previous amendment was ruled materially different. Considering this is a significant amendment, it's actually adding 1, 2, 3 new sections to the bill. It's a 2-page amendment.
Understood. Thank you. We'll take real short recess. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. Senator Clint, to your question, is not materially different. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a very long amendment. I'm still going through it right now. Okay, so I do have some other concerns with the amendment. One in particular would be that actually, can I ask for a 5-minute recess so we can digest this amendment, considering it's a considerably long amendment?
All right, but, okay, we'll do a 5-minute recess, all right? Thank you. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. Senator Clinton, do you have objection or comments you want to make on the amendment?
Yeah, I'm concerned about the amendment. Part of it includes, this adjudication committee is going to include elected officials. So to me, that politicizes it even more. You're going to have you do have the executive director of the Commission on Decolonization, but then you have the governor of Guam, the speaker, the president of the Mayor's Council of Guam. These are elected officials, and so my concern is, should elected officials be placed on an adjudication committee? Or should there be some sort of experts in this field placed on the adjudication committee,
Okay.
as opposed to elected officials?
So is that an objection or just comments? Or
Yes.
An objection, thank you. Madam Speaker, did you have any comments you want to make on this amendment?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this amendment to the bill is an excellent amendment. It's well thought out. It's thorough. It's going to add to the bill some guidelines, because the bill currently has no guidelines. It just says create an implementation plan. And other than that, no guidelines. And so this gives at least some guidelines, and we can debate which ones we don't like here, if that's the case, and make changes to that. But otherwise, I think as proffered, the guidelines are going to be very helpful to the executive branch, who is tasked with coming up with an implementation plan in 30 days, which is a very short period of time, I think, if they want to do justice to this. Let's not forget, we are going to be asking them to create a plan to do what the Department of Justice is doing, Mr. Chair. And so I think it's a huge task. I think the guidelines as specified here, at least these few that are being added in the bill, will help to ensure fairness. And I think that was one of the big things, is that we want to make sure that these are fair. And by representation among the different branches, among the mayor's council or his appointee, the general public, that it will help to ensure fairness, as opposed to receiving an implementation plan with no guidelines that might say, all from one type of class of people. And so I think this is a good approach for some balance. It also is detailed in specifying that we are going to follow federal guidelines and award limits as to the claims themselves. And that I think is probably the most critical part. And it adds reporting requirements, and it keeps the applications confidential. Even that, it's kind of like, if we didn't do that, there would be no exception in our local law to, open government that would make these people's, what they think is confidential stories, applications to the commission confidential. So I want to thank the author for the amendment. The bill was brought forth because it was hard for us on Guam to live with the one-year filing period. I think it's even harder for us to contemplate and get our minds around the difference that the federal government put in place, the difference between dying on December 22nd, 2016, which would have made you ineligible for war claims, and a person who died on December 24, 2 days later, 2016, who would have been eligible for this most recent Congressional War Claims Act. And so in preparation for the bill, I reviewed the congressional testimony of Tomas Barcinas, Beaches Elmsley, Ben Pangilinan, even our colleague, Senator Blas, and it was not contemplated that they would be cut off like that. The hundreds of people from Guam who submitted testimony, some of them I even went through the book because the Guam War Survivors Memorial Foundation put out 3 volumes of beautiful books, published the photos And the testimonies, the actual testimonies of those who are the reason we have the war claims law passed by Congress in the first place, because they came out before the commission and poured out their hearts and their souls, told their stories, relived that trauma, the pain, spoke of their resilience, and for all of us forever gave us an example of the fight that we should have in us for that type of justice and what we will be willing to do to ensure. And I was thinking that this bill might be one of the last times we're going to address war claims. People will think we're done with war claims because Congress is done with war claims. But we have to achieve justice, and so I think this amendment is going to help us get there, Mr. Chair, by keeping the process, if we're going to do it locally, by keeping it fair, keeping it open, reportable, and protecting the confidentiality of those claimants. Just Masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Madam Speaker. Senator Parrish, you wanted to speak to the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment. I think it's a sound amendment. What the current bill has, there's a lot of gaps, I think, as regards to what is this implementation plan. And I think this amendment answers some of those, or fills in some of those gaps. I think one of my concerns was that, again, if we were to adjudicate claims locally, should there be a difference between how the federal government adjudicates it versus us, it might leave, more problems. And this amendment addresses that under Section 13.204, consistency with established guidelines. Of course, we want to make sure that there's fairness in the process. So those that already receive their compensation funds, we want to make sure that those that will be receiving are also treated fairly and equally. So I think that's so important. I think the other thing that's really important about this is that all records are confidential. I think that's, when we're dealing with personal traumas, and we want to make sure that that is also, we ensure that that's protected. And I think this amendment takes care of that. I think also one of the things in the discussion of this bill was the realization that there was no tracking of the money, of when it was reimbursed, how it was moved, and I think this reporting requirement is so important in ensuring that. So it does, I believe it makes it stronger. It makes the bill stronger in that it ensures that whatever implementation plan is developed is fair, is transparent, and I think also, and that it, it's able to be done quickly, and so I think that this is a sound amendment. So I'm in support of this. So it's Masi.
Thank you, Senator Parrish. That being stated, I don't see any other hands up. Senator Tillo, would you close on your amendment, please? Do you choose to close on your amendment?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair.
All right.
Thank you so much. And I thank my colleagues who provided information with this. And it was stated early that, timing is an issue. And we have to get this done right away. Well, Mr. Chair, we can't even identify the funds that are going to pay for this. Section 30 funding has already been appropriated in the budget bill. So we would have to wait until the next round of Section 30 funding, which will be in fiscal year FY22 in September. So there is enough time to do this, enough time to put a committee together that is fair, a committee that can keep eyes on each other. We have different separate branches of government that look after each other, to make sure they're doing the right thing. Having the legislature involved, having the governor's office involved, having the mayors involved are two different separate branches of government. They can also, designate an individual to sit on this committee. Doesn't have to be them. So as far as time is concerned, there is some time. We're finding a fair balance here with this legislation. And I think the people of Guam want that too. They want to be able to know that individuals looking after, something as important as this to make whole are Manamku. And by the way, I'd like to wish my father a happy 92nd birthday today. Yeah. Thank you, colleagues. And I'm sure he thank you for that too as well. But, I promised him. I promised that I would make sure that I would do everything I can possible to make sure those who were left behind or who forgot for some reason or another, I mean, my goodness, people forget when they're in their 40s where they parked their car at Kmart. To be able to make to try and hit a deadline that's there. So we have a chance to make a difference now. This is a chance that and do it right and fair in every aspect. But most importantly, to provide that confidence and surety to the people of Guam who are watching. Mr. Chair and my colleagues, I ask for your support on this. I've worked very hard on putting a bill together. Unfortunately, it didn't make this session, and I'm not just going to put it on the session agenda because it didn't meet the 5-day notification, and I'm going to follow that rule. I'm going to make sure that if I'm going to put something on the agenda, it follows it unless it's an emergency. But this is an emergency in a sense, but we don't have the funding right now. If you told me, Mr. Chair, that OFB has found $6 million to $10 million right now today, then I would, for emergency purposes, to get those individuals who are currently alive today to be able to take part in something that is rightfully theirs. Not wait until they pass away. How many people have passed away so far of that 700? This is the right thing to do because it's a fair makeup of this commission that would be put together to adjudicate in a fair manner to make sure nobody is utilizing this for political gain at all. It's our job to protect the people of Guam and their interests, and especially the Manamku. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tello. My colleagues, there is an objection. All in favor of Senator Tello's Title's amendment, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Motion passes. We have one more amendment before we go on a recess. Senator Blas, hopefully it's a simple
Yes,
amendment.
it's very quick, Mr. Chair. Basically, what this provides is on line 24, page 3. Hang on.
Line 24, page 3.
And what this will provide in this is we talked about the implementation of a plan, and as I mentioned earlier, one of my concerns is that in this plan, it should also include where they plan to get the money to pay for this. So what this will provide is on line 24, page 3, it's right after an implementation plan. It says, comma, which shall include a proposed funding source or sources for the payment of war claims under Public Law 114-328. So what this provides is that in that plan is also a plan of how this is going to be, how this act is going to be paid for. Some suggestions, again, as it was proffered, as it was informed. This is a plan that will put together some suggestions and everything. It has to come back and recognize it has to come back to this body for approval and stuff. But I think that putting together a plan also has to put all aspects of that plan together to include the plan of how to pay for this. I liken this to, I can show you an architectural plan of a house I want to build, but if I got no money, that's nothing but a plan that can't be implemented. I think we want to do is implement a plan. And what this will do is it'll help to provide that information necessary for that plan. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Does anyone would like to speak to this amendment? There being none, are there any objection to this amendment? Madam Speaker, did you want to speak to it? None? Are there any objection? There being none, motion passes. Now, reminder, my colleagues, that's the ends of all amendments. We started earlier with comments and amendments, and the only two senators that weren't present at the time to speak was Senator Blas and Senator Clint when we first started. We ended with Madam Speaker, who then introduced an amendment, because that was the portion. Now, Senator Blas, Senator Clint, would you like to speak? Otherwise, we're going to move to rise. Senator Blas, nothing? Senator Clint, nothing? Senator Shelton, do you have a motion so we can wrap this bill up? It's a motion to recommendation to place. No, it's just a motion with recommendation to place, because then we still have two more bills in the committee of the whole. At the end of those, when we're done with all three, then it'll be only a motion on a recommendation to place. Then I will report out to the Speaker the recommendation of the committee. Okay? No. To vote on the bill? Oh, it's going to be on her. Yes, it's on you, Senator Shelton.
Close on the bill.
Close on the bill, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. I just wanted to add on the bill, right, that, so many before us have attempted to bring justice to the war claims issue. And there have been attempts, and there have been, even measures passed. And I think clearly the record, even the commission's findings, show that there were errors and that there was not justice. And that this most recent attempt by Congress also shows, lack of parity, really, between those who should be eligible and those who were actually eligible under the statute that was passed by Congress. So we are, by this bill, trying to rectify that, trying to use our own means of bringing justice, as we have done in so many other occasions, from war claims to land takings, to contamination. We've tried to bring our own justice when justice was not served. And so, I support this bill in its attempt to bring justice by opening the filing period. It doesn't say how long we're going to open it. The plan is going to specify how long that filing period will be extended. But again, I just want to put on the record that I join with Mr. Garrido, who testified on this bill, and the others who have testified before him about the injustice of precluding those who survived the war, the atrocities, the rape, all of it, Mr. Chair, the forced marches, the internment. They survived it all. They lived their lives. They showed us their resilience and their courage and their fortitude, and they built Guam from rubble, from ashes. Literally, the Chamorro people did that. And then they found the courage to testify before Congress, before congressional committees, before the Guam Legislature. And their testimony is so beautiful because they're tragic stories, yet their grace in telling their stories was exemplified for all of us. And I'm so grateful to the foundation that put those books together because we could see their photos, their pictures forever, their smiles. And I am just so sad is not the right word. Just, I still feel like we as a legislature, we must continue to ensure that if half of the people who testified, who we see in those 3 volumes of books, which don't even include all of the people who should be eligible, half of them died before the filing period, before December 2016. That's the only reason that they were not entitled to war claims. And a person who lived until December 24th, 2016, and then passed away, is entitled to war claims. It's not logical, not when you think about what war claims is supposed to be. And war claims is supposed to be all about not the money, as my colleague said, but the justice, the recognition, the statement that we see you, we recognize what you have been through, and this is a token of compensation for what you have been through. And I know that there are so many families that grieve, Mr. Chair, because they were excluded. And it's really very hard for them to take. And I agree that we, the people of Guam, we should not take that. It should not be our record that we reject that. Our record should always show that we will include them, even if Congress excludes them, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Shelton, would you like to close on the bill so we can? Senator Paris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to also register my sentiments that the work of reconciliation is not done once we pass Bill 130. Like the previous speaker had said, it leaves out a whole group of Chamorros who survived the war but did not survive the inaction of Congress. And, I'm reading through the committee report, some of the testimony that was given was very heartfelt. One of those that testified, witness, I believe her father was beaten to paralysis, and her mom had to drag him. And this is just one of the many stories about the atrocities of the war. And we should never forget that. And we must work harder with our congressmen to ensure that they too are compensated.
Thank you. Co-sponsor, Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, colleagues. Thank you, colleagues, for the good discussion we had on this bill. I just want to point out a letter that is also in the drive from Governor Leon Guerrero, which was a press release back on April 28, 2021. Quote, I support Vice Speaker Barnes' bipartisan effort to fully recognize the pain and sacrifice of Guam's greatest generation. We know that at least 700 of our people missed the war claims deadline through no fault of their own. And now is the time to heal these long-standing wounds. Under this measure, we can pay those who have been disenfranchised in months, not years. Quote, as the measure moves forward, I would ask that we specifically identify the use of Section 30 funds for this purpose. Doing this will ensure with absolute clarity that we turn the page on this painful part of our history. I want to thank the Vice Speaker Barnes and Senator Moylan for their hard work and willingness to work collaboratively. And Mr. Chair, in closing, I just want to reiterate my original statement on this measure, and I am proud of Congressman San Nicolas' work to deliver on a 30-year struggle for the people of Guam. But it cannot stop there. So long as one member of Guam's greatest generation is disenfranchised by the process, we have more work to do. And this is not a Democrat thing, it's not a Republican thing, it's just the right thing. And I do appreciate the Vice Speaker's efforts in reaching across the aisle to ensure that the structure is in place to finalize this long-standing issue, Mr. Chairman. We had the political will, we had the money to make it happen, so let's get it done. I thank my colleagues, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. Senator Shelton? Can you go ahead and, anyone else would like to comment? None? Senator Shelton? You can go ahead and close the bill, and then we can move on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our colleagues for yesterday's discussion, today's discussion, and reiterate that Bill 130-36 removes barriers and is going to get these reparations into the hands of our Manamku quicker than any other proposal that has been proffered before the legislature or Congress at this time. Because our war survivors have been waiting nearly 80 years for justice, for recognition of the pain and suffering they endured. But like many have said on this floor, they cannot wait any longer. There were some of us who were at the War Claims Processing Center a couple of years ago. We were there when they distributed the first checks to our war survivors, and we heard their stories at that time and many other times, and in our public hearings. They did not believe the day would come. But we still have hundreds of Manamku who are left to continue believing and hoping for their stories to also be recognized. So I want to thank all of our war survivors, our Manamku and their families, to extend a sincere and dunkulan assiduous masi to all of them for continuing to share their stories, for being here to advocate, to continue the fight for justice for all of our war survivors. Also want to thank Vice Speaker Tina Munya Barnes for her leadership on this bill, and for the opportunity here, Mr. Chair, to help us finally close this painful chapter of Guam's history with the passage of Bill 130-36. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to add myself as a co-sponsor to this bill, as well as you, Mr. Chair, and Senator Tolina Nelson.
And Senator Terlai.
And
Also, Senator Pito Terlahi.
Does anyone else like to be added?
To also add Speaker Therese Terlahi and Senator Sabina Perez.
All right. Are there any objection to that motion? I would actually ask if we can just add everyone all.
Mr. Chair, yes, I'd like to amend my motion, so to add myself as co-sponsor as well as all members of the body.
Thank you. Are there any objection? There being none, motion passes. Any other motion on your part there, Senator Shelton?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I move that Bill 130-36 LS, as substituted and further amended on the floor in the Committee of the Whole, with the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole to be placed in the third reading file.
On that motion, that it be placed on third reading file with recommendation of the Committee of the Whole, hearing no objection, motion carries. My colleagues, before we recess, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to recognize one of our colleagues on their 75th birthday, which happened yesterday, and that is our colleague, Senator Jose Pito Terlahi. Viva! 75 years.
to
Thank
This
you,
is
Peter.
Marcy, Mr.
My
Chair.
colleagues, we will recess until 2 o'clock and continue on with Bill 121. Please start preparing your amendments so we can move quicker on 121. Thank you.